happy Black History month to everyone. I won't even start in the whole like month thing and how it's not just a month. We all know. I don't need to make that need to have that conversation. But welcome to Beautiful Black Books. It's brought to you by Poetry Center San Jose. And for those who are new to us, this is really a reoccurring program featuring Black writers in conversation and followed by Q&A. It's really a vessel of exchange. The idea here is really what we want to do is bring Black writers to our communities and our communities to those writers to learn more about their sources of inspiration, what things were part of their formative sort of coming up in this world of creativity. I am so honored today to be joined by Jennifer. We've kind of come across each other, and we'll talk about this a little later as being sort of Black poet laureates. But I just want to start off by saying, hey, number one, it's great to see you. Number two, tell us where you're hailing from. Where are you talking to us from today?
It's good to see you as well, Tshaka. I am in Columbia, South Carolina right now.
Okay.
It's the afternoon here, so been up and about for a while. But my hometown is a small town called Johnsonville, South Carolina. It's like an hour away from the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh,
So that's
wow.
my hometown. That's where I grew up, and you see the setting of where I grew up a lot in my first book.
Okay. That's
Mhm.
that's very interesting because I think, I've interviewed a number of folks and it's really cool to see sort of how whether they've raised in a city or wherever. I mean, we have folks on the show from Europe and different parts of England. But
Yeah.
I'd love to know sort of where how has that influenced or impact your work now? And that could either come from where you originally are or where you are now. Like how does that
Right.
impact your work?
Well, for me, I'll talk about where I'm originally from. So the city is called Johnsonville, and I grew up in a neighborhood called Bluefield.
Okay.
So Bluefield is just this small community of, mostly Black people. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody takes care of everybody. So for my work, I do a lot of my work centers my experience as a Black woman from the rural South. Okay, so I grew up around fields, tobacco fields, cotton fields, cornfields, and woods. Okay, so a lot of my memories and my experiences are based on going to my grandmother's house in Muddy Creek, or going to my aunt Lola's house where her husband was a farmer and he had like all this farmland, and we would go out to the tobacco fields and stuff like that. So a
Mm,
lot of my work centers that experience of growing up in, the I talk a lot about nature and outdoors and things like that in my work. Um so I'll tell this story because it's part of my path as a poet.
mm,
And also it's a poem that's I'm probably going to read later on that it's based on. So I always loved words, always loved writing, and eventually one day I was outside jumping ditches because that was something you did for fun because you're in the middle of the woods. There's not a lot. There's not a lot of things around. We like to jump ditches just to see, okay, are you gonna clear the ditch or not? So one day I was outside and I jumped the ditch. When I jumped the ditch, it was kind of like I heard a voice that said something to the effect of, just as the bird sings freely, I'll be free again, or something to that effect. I can't remember
mm.
the exact phrasing. And so I was like, oh, let me go in the house and write it down. And when I went into the house to write it down, it came out as a poem. And I was 13 years old at the time, and I've been writing poetry since then. So yeah, a lot of my work is based on just my experiences with the land, with nature, with my family. My family is all up and through, always through my
Mm,
work. So that's those are like my huge influences.
gotcha. It's funny. I'm glad you brought that up because it was something that I read an excerpt about you being 13 and when the words first appeared and you jumping this ditch. And I was like, what? I don't get it. This this makes a lot of sense. I was going to get to it. So what do you think, what do you think that was? I mean, you said before I get into what my daughter sometimes call them my Tupac chakra moments. But we talk about ancestors, we talk about, you
Yeah.
know, calling to us, we talk about Black nature and all of those things,
Yeah.
and so I hear that and I hear so many different some kind of jump off points to you. Like, where
Yeah.
did you think that came from? Where do you think that was rooted from?
I think, I do think that was a voice of an ancestor. And it's just so amazing because I heard the voice as clear as day.
Mm,
Um and it really, it helped reinforce for me that this was kind of work that I've been called to do. Um and also, it reinforced for me because my grandmother told stories all the time. And at some point I was like, she would say the same story over and over again.
mhm,
And at some point I realized, like, grandma's telling me this because she wants me to remember.
mhm,
And so writing was the way that I chose to remember. And so a lot of my early writing is in her voice. My grandmother spoke Geechee. And so
mm,
a lot of my early writing was in her voice. And I kind of interviewing her, talking to her about her story helped me find my voice, which, has a little bit of Geechee in it,
mhm.
um but also not. So it helped me really figure out, like, okay, who am I as a writer and what's my purpose? And part of it is uplifting voices that haven't been heard, voices that have been silenced, including my own voice, right? So I really hope that in my work I do that.
Mm. So, and you do. Whatever address where you do. Uh, you mentioned, you mentioned Geechee. Can you tell folks on the call now who are reading
Oh
this
yeah.
what that is?
Yeah, so you have Geechee slash Gullah. Sometimes they're used interchangeably. But Geechee refers to the language that African Americans eventually developed from being enslaved, coming to this country, speaking all these different languages from these different tribes. So it blends a lot of words and sounds from other tribes with English. So there's like a Gullah Bible. There's a Gullah translation of the Bible
Mm,
that's available now. And there's a lot of other different things that have been, translated into Gullah. But there's also big, food culture and all kinds of customs and different things that we do as a part of the
yeah,
culture. Yeah. And
that
growing
is
up, I really kind of took that for granted because it was like, oh, this is just what we do. But it's not what everybody does,
right.
you know. Yeah.
No, I
I'm
think
sorry, I cut you off.
no, you didn't. You didn't. Please, this is your space. It's just you're there's so many things you're saying that's like igniting all of these things in my head. Things not only that
Mhm.
I know some of, but not a whole lot of. I remember coming to this country. I was
Mhm.
originally from England, and it's a smaller, it's a smaller group of people, and you realize
Mhm.
like diversity there is a little bit different, right? When I left England and came to the United States, there was this very, very much, people assimilated, right? You didn't know where they're from unless they told you. Whereas in Europe,
Yeah. Yeah.
much better, closer tied to where folks come from. So I
Mhm.
spent a lot of time in New York and thought that, okay, there's very, very much of a homogeneous type of a thing. And then I started, researching about the South and like, I'm like, what do you mean another language? You know what I mean? And so
Yeah. Yeah.
it's so exciting, and I'm so glad that um, it's making its way to like mainstream, and people like you are bringing those
Mhm.
stories um, to the surface because they need to be brought. And the Black experience is such a complex and layered
Yeah.
experience. And I think the more folks
Yeah.
understand that and the different touch points, the better it is. So I do appreciate that. and I guess on that same line, when I don't know what your experience was with the Black Poet Laureate Facebook website, right? Or not website, the group, when
Yeah.
for me, when mine was announced, and being the first Black Poet Laureate in Santa Clara County, a friend of mine,
Mhm.
Judah One, who's in the group as well, he
Yeah.
sent me this like anonymous link. He was like, I'm gonna link you up. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then a little bit later, a link came, and I was like, is this spam? I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing here. And I clicked on it and opened up this world of all of these artists that not only look like me, but think like me and are laureates and all this and it was
Yeah. Yeah.
a beautiful experience. So I guess what my question coming out of that is sort of what does it mean to you to be a Black poet laureate?
Mm. Yeah. Thanks for asking that question. So I'm the second poet laureate of the city of Columbia, South Carolina. So the first poet laureate was Ed Madden, who was a white man. So it's kind of like it feels good to be able to be the second poet laureate, but and be Black and
Mhm.
not, there's not this long history of decades and decades of poet laureates and none of them have been, Black. So it feels good to be in that position. Um and also, I think when I was first named as poet laureate, I think I kind of underestimated how important me being a Black woman as poet laureate is to Black people in
Mhm.
Columbia. Um I think I had really forgotten that. And then a church asked me to write a poem for Black History Month. And I was like, and that was last year. And so I was like, this is a big deal that I'm in this position, and I'm not just representing Black people in Columbia, I'm representing all the people in Columbia, but it means something special when you have someone who, looks like you that's in such a position. So one thing I always talk about too is, when I was a little Black girl in Johnsonville and Bluefield writing, I didn't have any person that I knew as a writer that was a Black woman,
Mhm.
anybody that looked like me that I could point to and say, hey, so and so is a writer and they do X, Y, and Z. So it, to me, I'm a representative for not just Columbia, but also where I'm from, where little Black girls and boys can say, hey, she's from here and she's poet laureate of the capital city of our state. Like, oh, I could do something like that one day.
Yeah. God is so, I mean, I think that's beautiful. I mean, I think it's so, we hear it all the time, and I think it feels like it just becomes um, just a statement. But this idea of like kids seeing something or seeing someone
Mm-hmm.
to aspire
Mm-hmm.
to, and this is so wild because I was just watching something yesterday. It was oh oh God, it's I forget the name of the show, but it's the guys that it's five um sort of celebrities, and they go out and they change people's lives. And there was an episode, what they talk about
Oh,
self-help, skincare. It's five something, and I can't believe I don't remember it. Um, but it was talking to the episode that I just saw was a gentleman who's deaf, and he's a football coach for a deaf school. And
oh,
it's gonna make sense. I'm not just going completely to the side, but
no, go ahead.
he so the idea is what he was saying was that like nowadays when parents are finding out that their children are deaf and stuff like that, they're either sending them to get ear implants or sonic, just medically treated. And so the whole world of like ASL
Mhm.
is diminishing. But he has this school. His
Mm.
father loved football, and so it's a school, and it's a deaf school, and he teaches football. But he said one of the I think one of the most impactful things was he went away to a summer camp with these older folks who had been living through being deaf and still living this full life and doing sports. And it was
Yeah.
that he saw when he was 7 that has curated the rest of
Mm.
his life. So long story
Yeah,
to get
yeah.
to the fact that how important it is for folks to see, especially younger folks, to see people in that position and people and seeing people that look like you in
Mhm.
those types of roles. And
Yeah.
this just jumps me down to a question that I was going to ask you earlier, but it kind of it bubbled itself up now. It's, as I mentioned, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and my mom and her mom and I have always tried our best to prepare her for this world that she's going to live in. Um,
Mhm.
and I read a poem that yours, it was commemorating the 50th anniversary of Women of Color Gender Studies at the University of South Carolina.
Mhm.
And it's called What We Build.
Mhm.
Yeah, What We Build. And I got to tell you, that first line broke me. Right, the first it was and so you guys are going to get a taste of this later on, but this first stanza says, to be woman is to be everything the world breaks itself against. It is to be all things and none. It is to cry out and hold in. Like, I just stopped at that point. I was like, I got to put this down for a little bit. I got to put it down.
Oh man.
It's just every moment. But I would love you to talk to me about that answer, and sort of, I know you talked a little bit about it, but what does that mean to you, and what sort of built, what was that kind of made you pour that into that particular poem?
About that, you want me to just talk about like that first line?
Yeah, yeah, that what I just read, because I had to hold up when
Um,
I got to the other part.
yeah, I was it took me a few months to write that poem. And so I just kind of started with jotting down some things, and that was that was part of the first thing that kind of came to me.
Mm,
Um and it's for me, it's just how unappreciated women are um in a in a larger context, and how women really hold up the world. Women,
mm,
women do so much work, especially the work in the home, that's that, unpaid, unseen,
mm,
unappreciated labor. But beyond that, the work we do, in our careers, in our professions. Um, so it's just, you know, to me, it just kind of shows how women do all these things, and they're all of this for everyone, but it's like, okay, other than, us taking care of ourselves, what how else are we taken care of? um or who takes care of us? Whose responsibility is it to take care of women, you know?
yeah.
um yeah, so those are some thoughts around that.
Now, I like I said, it was just sort of, it just in one stanza, it sort of encapsulated like 3, 4 months, like the current 3, 4 months of thought when I think about my, what my
Mm,
one, and like, how do
yeah.
you, such a different world than when we grew up, and just that to me just is like, if I can, get that on a pin, just attach it to her, just so she remembers, like, this is it's not you, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's not
Yeah.
you. Um, this is great. So jumping back a little bit, you talked about, I always ask my guests about their creation story. Like, I love Marvel and comic books. It's like, what was your creation story? And I know part of it is in the jumping of the ditch, but
Yeah.
some people could have just been like, okay, great story, I'm gonna write this down, right? But you took this further and even beyond that, in the sense of, you know, um, you bringing that to academia, right? And this, you're an English teacher as well. So talk to me a little bit about like how that transition happened, how it came from just like, hey, my mother's stories to, I'm gonna call myself a poet and I'm gonna go out there and put books in the world.
Okay. So, I'm 13 years old when I write that first poem, and then I just kept writing. And so I had like a notebook that I was writing, and I just kept writing. And then eventually I asked my mother to for Christmas one year, I was like, "Can I get an electric typewriter?" This is in the 90s. So I was like, "I want an electric typewriter for Christmas." And she got me my electric typewriter. And so then I was like, I would be typing up my poems. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna write a book. Um, so that that idea has always been kind of with me.
Mm,
Um, because I come from a family of, I talk about my grandmother being a storyteller, but I have several people in my family who are just these great storytellers. Like they can just sit down and tell you a story and will have you on the floor laughing. Um, and so I have, I'm not really, it may not look like it or seem like it, but I am an introvert. And so I'm not as, great with the oral storytelling aspect of it. So to me, writing was my way of storytelling. So yeah, just from there, I kept writing. I knew I wanted to be a writer. I know I wanted to study creative writing, but I didn't have a clear idea of what that life would look like. And so when I went to Agnes Scott, I majored in creative writing. I got that degree, and then I came back home to Johnsonville because my mother was ill. My mother had cancer, and so I came back home to help my dad take care of her. And I got a job at a newspaper because I was like, I want to write, and I want to write for a living.
Right.
So, where I'm from, basically the only way you do that is if you work for the newspaper, and so that's what I did. And in the process of working for the newspaper, I did a lot of stories on the school system. I went to schools a lot. I talked to the cafeteria ladies. I did an interview on a cafeteria lady that was retiring after like 50 years or something. And so I got a really close up look at the education system, and I learned about a program that would allow me to become a teacher without having an education degree. And I was like, teaching. That
Mm.
sounds like a good plan. And so that's that's how I got into teaching. And I taught at a high school for 3 years. And then I was like, you know what? I want an MFA. I've always got the Poets and Writers magazine, and I would see the little advertisements for the MFA. So I was like, I'm going to go get an MFA.
Mm.
And that's how I landed at USC. Excuse me. And I would say that was at USC, it's like when you graduate, you have a thesis, and your thesis is basically a book of poetry. And
Mm.
so that was the first time I had been I was trying to compile some poems into like this book about my mom, my grandmother, before that, but it wasn't there yet. But that thesis um that I wrote in 2014 is what eventually became my first book of poetry, Traveling Mercy. Put it on the
Mm-hmm.
little thing.
Oh yeah,
Oh, she's not coming through.
there it is. Oh,
Yeah.
we'll
Um.
link out the to your book and such.
Oh. Oh,
And
nice. Okay. So yeah, I revised this book for about 8 years. So I'll revise it, send it out, revise it, send it out, revise it, send it out, and yeah.
yeah.
So in 2022, I think, yeah, June of summer of 22, um, Finishing Line Press picked it up for publication.
Mm. That's fantastic. And you're jumping right into my questions. It's almost like you're alley-ooping them. The,
Yes,
the next
perfect.
place I was going to go was about this MF, about an MFA, and it's like, there's so many different entry points into this world, into this world of creative, creative writing and poetry and such. Um, and I feel like, you either have folks that are like formally trained and or folks that, just have a dope pen, and can
Right.
tell a story. So, it feels like you've been immersed in that world of the MFA. How do you think that's benefited you, or has it benefited you, and would you recommend that pathway for up and coming writers?
Okay. So it has benefited me. But before I talk about that, I want to say that to be a writer and to be a poet, you don't have to have an MFA. You don't have to have a college degree. What you do need to have is just experience, passion. You need to have the reps in of just writing, writing, writing. Find your writing community. Doesn't have to be a writing community from an MFA. You can build your own writing community. So I want to say that
Mhm.
first before I answer, because I think there's a lot of um I don't want to say stigma, maybe. I don't know what the word is, but there's a lot of people that think, oh, I got to do things this way before I can do that. And you don't necessarily have to. So like I said, the MFA was something that I really kind of wanted to do because I'm a nerd and I just love degrees. Like I'm getting a second master's degree right now. um so the way the MFA has benefited me, and I want to say I came to the University of South Carolina's MFA at kind of a transition time. So Kwame Dawes, who had been on the staff there for years, he just left. And then Nikki Finney would be eventually hired. But I wasn't able to have her as a professor. But I was able to, she was able to help me with my thesis. Nikki's a great friend and mentor to this day. But I didn't have her as a professor during my time there. But I would say the MFA helped me with it exposed me to a lot of different things about writing communities that I didn't know about, um Cave Canem
Mm-hmm.
and Callaloo. The Watering Hole actually was created by a USA MFA student while I was at University of South Carolina, and I was able to go to the very first watering hole that Tahima Jess and Ramika Bingham Risher and Lita Hooper was at.
Yeah.
So I think just kind of having those types of connections, which unfortunately I'm not a Cave Canem fellow. I'm put that out there. In my
Um,
dreams I am, but in reality I am
me,
not.
me too.
I support them in everything they do. I love them. Um, but I am a Callaloo fellow and a Watering Hole fellow. But I would say like just the networks and the connections I made outside of the MFA program, but also through the MFA program at the same time, those have probably been the most valuable aspects of having the MFA. Because I feel like if I wasn't there doing the MFA, I would not have had those opportunities, or I wouldn't have learned. Maybe eventually I would have learned about some of that stuff, but being in that environment and having other people say, "Hey, Cave Canem this," and I'm like, "What is Cave Canem?" You
Right.
know, um, so that aspect, and also I really enjoyed the classes, the poetry workshops I had. So Ed Madden, who was my professor at USC, and he's the first poet laureate of the city of Columbia. He did a lot of the workshops. Sam Amadon did some of the workshops, and it was a good experience being able to read poetry, get feedback, do the workshops with my peers. I would say though that the MFA wasn't always a supportive, nurturing environment. It feels competitive, which I think a lot of graduate programs are. Um, but I did make some friends, some people that I'm still friends with today, and that was about 10 years ago. So I did make some what I would consider lifelong friends from the experience. Um, but yeah. Oh, and also the formatting the thesis was very, detailed. And I think that really helped me with when I was getting my manuscript prepared to be sent out. I had a guideline for, okay, I need to make sure I do the table of contents like this. I need to
Mm-hmm.
make sure I do a section break here, and those little things like that you isn't really a big deal, but makes an important distinction, important difference. So that was very helpful as well.
Gotcha. I love that response because the idea that, you have folks that are sort of on both sides of it, right? And I think you kind of touched on this a little bit. There's this sort of MFA in academia world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're not recognized unless you're recognized, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And then and then you have folks who want to get into that world, but just like you said, they're sort of, they may not have a pathway to get through the MFA, and that deters them from following their passion. So I love the way that you put that, like, yes, it is advantageous, you know, but I think it's like everything else is what you do with it, right? If you're using
it's
that,
what right.
you know,
It is. because everybody that went to Harvard and Yale didn't get a good job.
Exactly.
You know, like
Exactly.
the people who like, okay, let me get me an internship, let me network and do, like, it's what you do with it more than anything else.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
that's fantastic. So you being an educator, right, and an English teacher to boot, how do you think poetry can connect and resonate with our younger generation?
Oh yeah. Um, so the compactness of poetry and what you're able what a poet is able to do, emotion, or the amount of emotion a poet is able to put in a very small amount of space on the page. I think that appeals to our students, because they don't have people who a lot of our students don't have adults who listen to them.
Mm,
So when they are expressing their emotions, or if they're saying, I feel this way, some people grow up in families where nobody wants to hear your feelings. Nobody wants to hear your emotions or what you're thinking about. And so poetry gives them an avenue to express those feelings, to express those
mm,
emotions. And I will say a lot of our students these days are very in tune with their emotions. They're very um outspoken about the types of things, the types of treatment they're willing to accept and not. So poetry just gives them a chance to figure themselves out and express themselves, to have a productive, constructive outlet for those emotions and feelings.
thought of it that way, right? I mean, I kind of did, but never, because the first thing we get, at least at my age, the first thing you go to is these young people, they ain't listening. You know what I mean? But it's big,
Yeah,
they're not, they feel like they're not being heard. So the idea of
yeah,
concise and economy of language is almost a perfect place for them to talk through these things. So
yeah.
that's a great way of
And
looking at it.
it's really unfortunate because we kind of teach the love of poetry out of kids in the education system. Um, and we also, I think a lot of students think that being a poet isn't something they can do because they write poetry that maybe doesn't rhyme, or it's not like so and so's poetry. And so, you know, another important part of being a poet laureate is helping those young people to see, like, you don't have to write a poem that rhymes. If you do,
Mhm.
it's fine, but you don't have to. You can be a poet as well.
Yeah,
You can write a little 3-line haiku. Boom, you're a poet.
exactly. That's so dope. Yeah, I mean, look, when I taught workshops, and some of the best workshops I've taught is to third and fourth graders and little kids that,
Yeah,
and I've said it before. It's like they don't. It's almost like they don't understand physics yet. So it's like I can write this line. There's nothing in their head saying, well, actually, gravity won't allow
yeah,
that. You know what I mean? It's like
right.
so it's just free thought, which is so
Free.
beautiful. You
Yeah, they're
know,
still free.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Mhm.
And in that vein, right? I've taught you know I've taught workshops where we're learning all the language of poetry, allegory, and metaphor, and blah blah blah. And then I've come in the next day and say, okay, so forget everything I told you before, just write. What do you feel? Do you feel sort of the formal training of, I guess trying to figure out how to say this, right? There's this academic side of the poetry, right? And a
Yeah,
metaphor, a metaphor, like, okay, this is about the best, a better way to do it is like you have a student who's a rapper, and he heard and he's writing, but he doesn't know that what he just wrote was a metaphor or
right.
called a simile. Does that
Yeah.
make him less of a poet? You know what I mean? So like where's your stance on that type of thought, or how you teach that?
Um, so that's a really good question, because these young people have access to, figurative language and those craft elements. Like they're all around them all the time. Any song, whether it's a rap song, a country song, whatever, the lyrics are gonna have something in it. So we have that language available to us. It's around us. But just when someone says, hey, look, this is what a metaphor is, this is what a simile, they go, oh, that's what it's called. Okay. And so now they have that kind of as a part of their toolkit. So
Right.
they were using it kind of just because before, like, oh yeah, that sounds really good. But now they know what it is, and they know why it's important to use it or how to use it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there just to kind of and I think that goes back to demystifying poetry
Yeah.
as this big ivory tower thing. Like, you know this stuff. You've heard the nursery rhymes when you were a kid. Like, this, you know songs, so you have the language is there. We just got to name it and define
Right.
it for you. Yeah.
Fantastic. Wait, wait,
But
we gonna get
were you asking me something about like formal like poetry, like different poetic forms, like villanelles
no,
and all that? Okay.
no, it was exactly how you answered it, because
Oh, okay.
it could be many forms. And I ask this question all the time, and it comes out slightly different every time every time I ask it. So I'm just
Yeah.
accepting what comes back from it. We have there's one person, one of our listeners, Ernesto, is asking, what do you think about other poets that are BIPOC that have influenced you?
I have kids in there loud. Okay. um I would say most of the poets who have influenced me have been Black poets. So hold on a second. Okay, so I can remember being in, I think, middle school and reading Gwendolyn Brooks,
Mm,
Gwendolyn Brooks's poetry, and being like, oh man, I want to do that. I want to be like her. I want to be like Gwendolyn Brooks.
uh,
Um, Nikki Finney, I'll keep saying her name. She's been a big influence because of the way she weaves history into her
mm,
poetry, among other things. Um, I always whenever I'm asked this question, I always blink
mm.
because it's like I have BIPOC poets that have influenced me, but it's like I can never, their names just escape me
Same
whenever
thing.
anybody asks me that question.
Yeah.
Um,
It's the same. I have to write it down so I can. Oh, I may be able to help you. Wait a minute, because I do my research. Hold on.
I see that.
Uh, there was an article written about you, and
Oh yeah.
they asked like, what are what's the list, and the writers that inspire you, and I have them here. It's Lucille
Yes.
Clifton,
Hmm.
Zora Neale Hurston, Terrence Hayes, as you said, Nikki Finney, Maya Marshall, Ed Madden, Gwendolyn Brooks, and Alicia Ostreicher.
Okay.
Yes. All right. Well, there you
Um,
go. So I answered it for you.
thank you. Thanks for the assist.
Indeed, indeed. No, that's what actually gave me the idea, is like, I need to write that down, because I do get that question. And depending on where your head is at the moment, you're sort of, there's so many.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I've read all of these books and I have people that I can say, but it's just like I forget it. As soon as
Yeah,
someone asks me that question, it's just like,
absolutely. So Jennifer, what's your favorite word?
flummoxed.
Flummoxed. All
Yeah.
right. I don't know. I've heard the word. I don't know, I don't know what that means.
We have like bewildered.
Mm,
Um yeah, so me and my teacher friends, we pick a word and we just run with it. So flummoxed is one of our favorites.
I love it. I love it. What is the role of a poet?
To tell the truth.
Ah, yes. Yes. Um, what have you learned about life from being in this craft?
I've learned that I need to listen to what the poem is trying to tell me, and explore that instead of pigeonholing the poem into what
Mm,
I think it should be.
mm. You got an example? I'll put you on the spot.
Um, no, I don't have an example, but it's kind of like when you sit down to write and you think, oh, I'm going to write a poem, and this is what this poem is going to be, and then you just kind of get stuck in trying to make that poem that thing, when you need to just write. Maybe you don't need to write about that thing yet, maybe you need to write around it, maybe you need to write something else. So
Mm,
kind of going off and exploring that other thing that's not quite what you set out to do.
yeah, that is perfect. I wish I want to cut this part right here and make that into a meme. That part right there, because I hear you. We get so stuck in that I got to write this poem about this thing, and I think
Mhm.
sometimes beat ourselves up, right? Because sometimes it's about a good cause, right? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
this thing happened and I got to write about it. And you get so lost in the writing about it that you're not seeing this other thing that the universe is
Right.
creating creating for you.
Yeah. And that goes back to what you said before about the third and fourth graders. They don't know about physics yet.
Mm,
So we do. And so we let that limit us, when
yes,
we need to free ourselves within that practice.
exactly. So I'm gonna open it up in like one more second for you to read for us for 20 minutes or so. Um,
Okay.
I do have one or uh two more questions for you right now. Uh,
Okay.
what's your bucket list like for an audience? Like if you were like, okay, if I can ever
Ooh.
get on this stage or in front of these people, who would that be?
Oh, I've never been asked that one. I want to say the new school, but don't ask me why.
Mm,
It just seems like you got to do something with the new school.
yeah,
Um, so them, and then oh, I don't know. I'll have to think about this one. I've never been asked this question. What's
that-
my bucket list audience?
yeah, yeah. That's cool.
Um,
Yeah, we come
yeah,
back. This is just your first beautiful black books. You got another book coming out in 24, so we're
yeah.
gonna get you
Okay,
back. Who's your? I don't know if you listen to rap music, but if you do, who's your favorite rapper?
Three Stacks, Andre 3000,
Tell me about it.
Rhapsody. Um, yeah, they're probably my two favorite.
Gotcha. Check out Sha
Mhm.
Rock from Chicago. If you like Rhapsody.
Okay,
Yeah. Sha Rock. She's yeah, Sha Rock is killing it.
I
Um,
think I've seen her. I think I've listened to some of her stuff.
no.
Yeah.
Are there any negative aspects of or pitfalls in being a poet?
Um, Pitfalls. I would say the actual work of being a poet doesn't have any of that, but it's one of my professors called it the business, the poetry business.
Mm,
um so I would say the downfalls of that is like there's not a lot of money in poetry.
mm,
When you think about like fiction and other genres of writing, there's not a lot of money in it unless you are Amanda Gorman, or a Terrence Hayes or something like that.
mm,
um so and it also, I would say, it just kind of just feels like you're yelling out into the void, and it's like, hey, I got this book and it's great, and
yeah,
nobody can hear you.
right. Oh God, that is such a perfect description. That is such a perfect description. And then you just like grab it onto whatever is gonna come back. You know?
Right, and you're just like, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do that and it's gonna be great, and it's just, but it's one thing I've been telling myself is the people who hear my book, no matter what that number is, anybody who hears my poetry will get what they need from it when they encounter it. So when they encounter is going to be the question,
Right.
but I'm going to still go out into the world and I'm going to read poems from this book.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens.
Wonderful. But without any further ado, that was the perfect jumping point to opening up this space for you to share your work with us.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Did you want me to read that women's and gender studies poem?
I want you to read what you want to read, but yes.
Okay, let me pull it up. I'll read that one first. Where is it? Oh, I'll read that one first. So that one is commemorating um the Women's and Gender Studies program at USC recently became a department. Before that, it was like a program. And actually, when I was at USC, my I got a graduate certificate in Women's and Gender Studies, so that's like my connection to them. And so they asked me to write a poem commemorating 50 years and also commemorating their 50th. So they have all this program that they've been doing this school year for their 50th anniversary. So I wanted to try to get a sense of everyone in the poem, like the different ways to be a woman, the different intersections of being a woman, intersectionality. I wanted to make sure I got that in there. Shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw. Um, so yeah, I'll read that one. So this is what we build. To be woman is to be everything the world breaks itself against. It is to be all things and none. It is to cry out and hold in. It is to do all of the work and get none of the credit. We were on the margins of academia and society for so long until the brave ones came and said, no more. We have a history and a voice. We are here. We have always been here. The time of silence is over. The time in the shadows is over. The time spent on the margins is over. They had no money, got no credit, and no tenure, but no matter. The work still needed to be done, and so they did it. We are beneficiaries of their work, this work, our work that is never quite done. We began as the Women's Studies program and then became Women's and Gender Studies department. When you call us by our names, you call us by many names. We stand as Indigenous, as multiracial, as Black, as white, as Hispanic, as Latinx, as Asian American, Pacific Islander, as SIBs with various abilities and religions, as non-binary, as cisgender, as transgender, as intersex, as lesbian, as pansexual, as bisexual, as asexual, as gender fluid, as agender, as genderqueer, as feminists, as womanists, and as whatever language we will create to describe ourselves in this now and in the future. We were once at the margins, but we have been steadily traveling to our center where all the intersections of our crossroads meet for us to gather and celebrate. We have come this far by work of hands convinced of the urgency of this work. We know how gender is a construct, how it's built, and how we are expected to conform, but instead, we have constructed safe spaces to study and be scholars of ourselves and others not like us. This space has endured because you have endured. After the classes, after the lectures, after the programs, we step into the world, still ourselves, still battling with a republic of zombies who want to erase us. The next 50 years, we will have new battles, new issues, but we know the power of now and how it can shape the future. We know gender is a construct. To study its construction is to study its demolition, and we are ready with our hard hats, our hands ready to work. We steadily call ourselves in from the margins, and as we walk, we know we will face many battles, but we stand unafraid and brave. We stand, we stand, we stand. Right. So I will read from Traveling Mercy now. And let's see. I'll start with her who peopled we. Um, so this is part of that Geechee coming out in this poem. Um, Part of Geechee is kind of using the wrong, not the wrong, I shouldn't say wrong. Part of Geechee is using a different case of a pronoun. Okay. So her who peopled we. I a swamp water Geechee looking out across this ocean. Every shore of the Atlantic a reminder of death and birth, of shells, skulls, hulls, broken slave ships, and her who tied and toted my line with her across these waters. Her looked up between the slats of wood, saw the shining moon from the belly of the ship, the everlasting moon I gaze at tonight. Her one of me, eaten but not swallowed. Her a oblation who went through the door of no return but came back with me. Her always comes back for me, even when I leave myself. Her comes back. Okay, so this is the poem about how that moment of jumping the ditch. It's an Ars Poetica, and that's the title of the poem, Ars Poetica, which basically is a poem about poetry or about um, the art of poetry and writing poetry. So there is an epigraph to the poem, and this is from William Wordsworth that says, "Let others that know more speak as they know." Girl child jumping ditches, sweat kissed with azalea nectar. I know then what I know now. I am the poet in the throat of the bird on her lonely flight, fleeing the chaos at dawn, sheltering the girl sitting inside of herself inside of the house. Standing out in the distance, I wait for myself to come back. Wait for the bird to call me home, to call the home in me out. My first poem stands out in the distance, pausing and cooing like the first bird perched on the tree of forbidden fruit, pecking at the flint flesh of knowledge until she broke seed. Sweat kissed with the poem that had been trying to escape me before I was born. My first poem stretches out of the palm of my hand into the lives long past and lives longing to go so they can come back, reclaiming every bit of word stored up. I am ghost and ghost maker. I do not speak truth, only what I know to be true. I am the fisherman's daughter with net and oar. I am the poet in the mouth of the fish. I am the seamstress's daughter with my needle and thread. I am the design in her pattern. I come with much work, and the light ain't long. Okay. So, Travel and Mercy is the title of my debut book. And Travel and Mercy is a saying where I grew up, where somebody's going on a trip or they're driving up the road a piece, you know, you say travel in mercy because you're wishing them a good trip, safe travels. So in Travel in Mercy, I have different journeys and travelings that I go on. So part of it is traveling through history. So I'm looking at the history of Bluefield. I'm looking at the history of Johnsonville. Excuse me. I'm also looking at the personal history of my, like my family, my parents, traveling through grief and traveling through death. Because my parents died before I turned 30. So I lost both of my parents in my 20s. And so a lot of the book is my journey through grief. So part of and also time. So I'm a time traveler in the book as well. And so this next poem I'm going to read you, I'm envisioning what I'm envisioning things about my birth. Um and so those a lot of the poem makes reference to Georgetown, South Carolina. So and because that's where I was born. And also the first line of the poem is also the title of the poem. So I'm just going to read the title and then just keep going. The road to being born is a long one, treading much trouble. Black tea-stained river water pours into the eager mouth of Winyah Bay, where it intertwines like a braid on its way to the Atlantic. On this road, we pass haunted tobacco warehouses in Hemingway, the auctioneer's voice waiting for fall to make him flesh again with the scent of sweet cured tobacco. To cross into this world, I cross many water worlds with woods in between. Tall pines line both sides of the road as if they are lights lining a landing, waiting for my descent. I am ready to step into myself and enter this realm, the height of it pulsing hard in my blood. I slip through the slit in my mother's belly, the smell of marsh water in my nose. My parents only prepared boy names, but I am Albina, her who comes on Tuesday. On the road home, we go through Muddy Creek, the soft rush of water like the lullaby of my mother's blood, choppy, Peter, and deep creeks. At Granny Mootie's white house in the middle of a tobacco field, she stares down at me and mourns the arrival of another girl child who may drop her books and then her panties for any man. We passed the building where men in white hoods strategized where to burn the next cross, which was piece of the road down from the old Huggins place where Ma was born. And then finally home. Home in the quiet blue of the field, the quiet chaos that is the swirl of voices whispering to me in tongues I will only remember when I go back down the road, when I cross over into the other blue and slip under the slit of the horizon to start this pilgrimage again. Right? So I mentioned traveling through death and grief. So the next two poems I will read will be about that. And this is another poem where the title is the first line of the poem. When you write your mother's obituary, she will be sitting next to you, her face unflinched in death's redundant river. You will carefully write the scripture she wants as her battle cry. You will write your own name among the list of survivors. When you write your mother's obituary, she will tell you to record her funeral arrangements. No pink, only purple flowers. Do not spend too much money on flowers. Bury me in St. Mark, not Jerusalem. Don't bury me in them woods. Don't put no picture on my obituary. I don't want to be face down in some ditch somewhere. Have them saying, I'll fly away when they wheel me out. You will try not to think too hard about what you're doing right now. Later, you will carefully type these last wishes and save them among your poems. You will title it Ma's Obit. The next day, you will go to work and sit in a county council meeting for the newspaper you work for. Ma's obit is a seedling in your chest. Sometimes it is hard to breathe. So you go to a psychiatrist. And on the first visit, she makes you cry, says it's not normal to work and go home and nothing else. She tells you the story of her father dying of cancer, but you don't care about her father. On the second visit, she says you may need to get on antidepressants, but you do not believe in them. Even if the pill makes you feel better, it can't change the cancer eating your mother's colon, liver, and lungs, eating, and eating, though it is already full. Fuck her. You stop going. You may have a friend in Jesus, but you're not talking to him right now. The now sapling in your chest is getting too much water and light. You still get up and go to work until your mother quits chemo and you take a few days off so your father can have a break from stiff arming death. When you watch your mother take her last breath, it will be raining. Your father will be crying, and you will feel your mother's hand snap several branches off the sapling, but its roots will be intact. She will flash back to the moment when she held you in her arms for the very first time. When the funeral home director comes in his shark skin suit, he will give you a paper outlining the obituary and order of service. You will open the document, Ma's obit. You will copy and paste it into a fresh document. You will pick the last dress she will ever wear. You will pick pearl earrings. When you write your mother's obituary, you write your past obituary. You are the twin oak in the backyard, standing and observing, shedding leaves and acorns. This one is Leaves Like Prayer. This is what leaves like a prayer. The collard greens my father planted. A collard is a cabbage that does not develop a heart. Their green leaves are like hands about to clasp in solemn devotion, arching towards the sun for a blessing. My father sleeps in his grave, and the collard greens he planted keep growing in his autumn garden. The frost sweetens them, and the time comes to reap what dead hands have sown. My brother cuts the green hands from the earth's body. The green prayers do not leave the black earth. But here we are at the table with turkey and stuffing, clasping our hands over his greens drenched in ham hock juice. We eat prayers. This we do in remembrance of him. Take, eat his love, grown for you and me. Okay, I think how much time do I have left?
You got like two more.
Two more? Okay.
Mhm.
So I'll do okay, that was kind of long. Let's see. Okay, so I'll do uh The Road to Being Born. So this is the second version of The Road to Being Born. There's a few poems that have the same title, but it's a different poem. There are like 3 insomnia poems as well. So I'll read the second, The Road to Being Born. He wasn't the one holding the baby's heart in the center of his body. He wasn't soaked with the sacred sweat of laboring with the stubborn one they named Michael. Something about a woman's parted legs makes a man hungry. Fried chicken, coleslaw, mashed potatoes. On return, the doctors say they must cut his second son out of the womb. She wanted tubes tied. He did not. The decisions we make when we are full. On the road back to Bluefield, Ma is silent, sizzling, her path to motherhood still gurgling like all these rivers and creeks they cross to get home. And 3 years later, when they come back down that road with me nestled under her rib, they are sure I am only daughter born last. Okay. Um, okay. This last one is called White Shoulders. Um, White Shoulders is the name of a perfume my mother used to wear. White Shoulders. A plume of cigarette smoke hovered over the cornstalks as he palmed the cobs, shrugged at the thought of white shoulders. The perfume she wore, the bottle he kept in his pocket. When they were apart, he kept her with him. The scent of her was as close as the smell of dirt and dust after plowing, when the wind carried traces of it and triggered his days working in Tar Heel tobacco fields. Fresh earth wounds open to accept a seedling that will never sprout, stays buried until the trumpet waters it to life. At goodbye, he could smell her brown skin still, even through the purple laden coffin. He smelled it even when he drove past a fire curing tobacco barn in mid August. In a wave that rushed his barn door, he smelled her again. She came to get him, and in his pocket, a receipt for Dr. Pepper. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I mean, I like I just see there's so much I put it in the chat, there's so much spirituality that's in the work. There's so much I'm kind of waiting for your third book called Black Nature. It just feels it just made that up. That's I'm putting that in the universe. The work is so grounded. It feels so rooted, in sort of the environment, who you are and such. It's just beautiful work. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
No, of course, of course. Now we have a couple more questions at the end,
Okay.
sort of close out some things. Um, if your if this book, Traveling Mercy, if it was a singer or an author, who would it book? Who would it be, man?
If it was a singer,
Yeah.
ooh. Mm.
It's like asking which one of your kids is a favorite kids, right?
I know. I'm trying to think. It has to be a Southern person, but I don't know.
Mm, love it. I love it. When you think about it, I might have stumped you for now,
That's interesting.
but
Yeah.
you think about it,
Okay.
and if you come up with it during this conversation, then great. If not, please let me know, and I want to share it with I want to share that with everyone as well.
Okay.
Uh, we've got. I'm gonna almost get to what we end the show with, is you call a quick fire round, which I say some words and then I ask you for the first thing that comes to your mind. But
Oh, okay.
before we get there, just trying to prepare you. I got what I call the Who Dat section. All right, so the Who Dat section is you got three people in an elevator, right? And the
Okay.
elevator breaks down, and you're in that
Mhm.
elevator for 3 hours. You can pick any three people, past or present, to be in that elevator with for 3 hours. Who would they be and why?
Um, Zora Neale Hurston.
Mm,
I would just love to talk to her about, all of the folklore and all of the people she encountered doing her work. Um, probably Tupac as well.
Wow. Okay.
Um, yeah, I just again, I just would like to have a conversation and um get a peek behind that mind of his.
Mm.
Um, and then, ooh, um, I don't know.
Mhm.
Third person.
It could be two people. That's all right.
Could be two. I can't. I'm not thinking of a third one right now.
That's all right. I feel like
It's an
those two
interesting
will
question.
take up your 3 hours. People take up your 3 hours.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Um, if what would you say, if you have one, is like an interesting writing quirk that you have?
Oh, an interesting writing quirk. Um, well, I don't know if it's interesting, but I do it like to write my poems out by hand first and then type them up.
Really?
Um, yeah, I do because that's how I started out. But
Mm.
also, um, it's to me it's like an extra layer of revision. So I'll write out an initial draft, and then as I'm typing it up, I'll do additional revisions.
Mhm.
Um, so that's something that I do. But I also try to get myself out of like you don't have to write it down every time. Like
Mm.
you can type up something in your notes section on your phone or
Yeah,
like that's writing as well. So
yeah.
I try to get out of that
That it's
mentality
it's
because sometimes, yeah,
it's hard, right? I mean, it's also part
it
of that.
is.
Yeah, it's not even people ask that question sometimes, and I'm like, it's not. Sometimes it's not process as much as it is um necessity.
Yeah.
You know, I write differently before I had a child, or when I was driving
Mm-hmm.
into work or whatever. You know what I mean? So things.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I've heard people say, "Oh, I can only write my poems with a blue pen." I'm like, okay,
Oh,
yeah, yeah. So I mean, look, that's what works.
wow. That's hey, if
Yeah,
that works for them.
that's what works. Uh, uh. Also, I'm going to go back to that other question about a singer. Your book can also be an actor. So I don't know if that helps anyway. If your book, if Traveling Mercy was an actor.
I I
Or,
feel like this book would be if it was an actor. So this would be a little easier. If it was an actor, it would be is it I think her name is Ajane Ellis.
mm, what's she?
Um
I'm terrible with names, but
she's in a lot of stuff. Did you see Lovecraft Country?
yes,
So she was the one that had her own episode where she was slipping in and out of time.
yes. Oh, yes,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I can so see that. I can so
Yeah,
see that
yeah.
right now. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like powerful, but nurturing, but rooted. Like, yeah, I could see all
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. All right. So we're going to come to our closing, and it's called, again, what I call the quick fire round. And this is really just about, the first thing that comes to your mind when I say this word. It could be
Okay.
one word, it could be a phrase, whatever the case may be.
Okay.
Um, but first word, poetry,
Love.
mother,
Father.
South Carolina,
Joy.
daughter,
Son.
language.
Language.
No,
Just kidding.
that's good. This is
Love. No, I'm gonna say love. I want to say love again. Love.
right. That's all right.
Okay.
Waffle House.
Sucks. I'm sorry. We went to Waffle House this morning. We had a terrible experience. So
It's okay. That is exactly what I want. This is what
that's the first. Yeah.
I want, guttural. This is exactly what I want. Next word is blood,
Water.
pain,
Joy.
black man,
Black woman.
lineage,
Legacy.
slavery,
Pain.
student,
Teacher.
woman,
Man.
Black woman,
Black man.
war,
Peace.
laughter,
Joy.
loss,
Pain.
Kanye West,
What?
Kanye West.
No,
What?
that was somewhere.
Yes, okay. All right. No, my internet goes in and out sometimes.
What?
I love it. Religion,
God.
General Lee,
Dukes of Hazard.
mhm. Slam poetry,
Dope.
love,
Hate.
literature,
Poetry.
Palestine,
Free.
Obama,
Black.
father,
Mother.
wife,
Husband.
dirt,
Seed.
money,
Coins.
future.
Past.
And the last one is Bible.
Literature.
Mm, mm. The
I'm gonna
whole
get in
session
trouble.
on
I'm gonna get in trouble for that one.
the whole section on that one. Look, Jennifer, this has been fantastic. I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you and sort of getting a little bit getting behind who you are and your work. I urge everyone who is listening now or listening later on to dive into the work of this wonderful writer. You'll be enriched. But look, thank you for spending time with me,
Thank
for
you.
spending time with the audience, and you know, when this, let me know when this. Well, I'll be stalking you, so I'll know when your book comes out. You know, and so we can set up some more time to talk about your new
Sure.
book in the
Yeah,
market.
I would love that. And I want to thank you for reaching out to me. Thank you, Beautiful Black Books and the Poetry Center San Jose. This is my West Coast debut. So
There you go. There you go. We can
I've,
bring you out when we get.
I've had a really great time.
This is fantastic, and you know, we'll talk when we. One of the things I want to do is get, you know, this kind of stemmed out of the pandemic and doing everything on Zoom, but we're gonna try and get some live bodies up here, and you know, again in the
Oh yeah.
essence of trying to bring writers to communities and communities to writers. You know, we want to bring.
Yeah, that's what it's about.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll figure that out and work all that out. But look, you have a wonderful
Yeah.
rest of the day. Thank you so much. Keep
Thank
doing what
you.
you're doing, and really appreciate the time.
Thank you.